So, Marco, on behalf of the standing group, I would like to thank you once again for having accepted this invitation.
Thank you very much, Daniela. Thank you to all the members of the group for this invitation and for being here. I know that some of us are a bit sometimes suffering about the overload of these webinars, but it's still good. It's still better than doing nothing. And so what I will do today actually is not that different from what I did a few months ago for the Mix City Pol meeting. But still, I think the questions, many questions remains unsolved. And, for me, it's also very interesting to share these analysis and these points of view and to maybe get feedback. I will now try to launch the PowerPoint presentation. Okay, and please, Daniela, confirm that it's working.
Yes, it's
It
working.
is working. So, anti-racist mobilization in Europe, changes and continuities. I will start because I think it's very important these days to start with that, to ask that question and try to answer to it. Do I have the right to address that topic? Why is it so? Because I'm a sociologist, political scientist. I've been working on these issues for quite a long time. I'm from a working class immigrant background, raised and educated in the suburbs, the working class suburbs of Liege. So I'm second generation, even though I'm old. So this is also to break some ideas that, some people identify second generation to youth. No, second generation can also be old people like me. Objectively, phenotypically, I'm white, but subjectively, this is not the main point of my identity. James Baldwin was saying, it's up to you. As long as you think you're right, there's no hope for you. As long as you think you're right, I'm going to be forced to think I'm black. So if it's up to me, I would not define myself as white. But of course, I understand that in the present debates, it's very difficult to defend that idea. But still, I wanted to say that this is not the main element of my self-definition. But of course, I do understand that I can be classified in that category of people in the present society. My training is in sociology with a very strong, inspiration in some Marxist theories and debates, more on the side of Gramsci than other people. And I've also worked quite a while in the US on immigration and race issues. But when I pretend that I have the right to talk about these issues, of course, I'm not saying that I'm taking the floor to voice other people's concerns. I'm giving you my point of view, the point from which I look at society. Of course, I do not pretend that I can ever experience what racialized men and women experience. Of course not. But I think that I can try to understand, explain social and political dynamics. And of course, the multiplicity of voices on an issue is probably a move towards, a better understanding and explanation of the social dynamics. I think that, the social science requires that we try to get out of our own experience in order precisely to make sense of an increasingly complex world. And I've always tried to defend that point of view. I've always resisted the positioning of myself because of my origins as, the specialist of Italian immigration, the legitimate person to talk about uh, immigration, Italian immigration in Belgium. I think that I've always, after my thesis that was on the Italian experience in Belgium, I've decided that I didn't want to be the specialist on Italian immigration just because I happen to be by Italian origin. So I want to make that clear. I claim the right to talk about racism and anti-racism, but of course I respect the obligation, and of course I don't want to do that, to speak on behalf of other people and to steal the voice, for example, of racialized scholars or racialized minorities altogether. Uh, is This is the first question. I do think it's important to raise it and to take a stand from the start. The second is it really possible today to have a real debate about racism, about race, about anti-racism in the current context where polarization, tensions are very strong? Some people would say that, if you take a concept like race, or even if you talk about racism and anti-racism, maybe there are essentially contested notions that would never uh, lead to any form of consensus. But I do think that it's possible, and maybe I am naive, it is possible to try to have a real debate, an academic debate about uh, the social dynamics, the political dynamics, without immediately falling into insults, into disqualification of the other people just because they disagree with you. So here, uh, I don't claim to be the holder of any truth. I just claim that, I'm worried about how society is changing, and I'm trying just to use the tools I've been given through my career in order to try to make modestly a little sense about what's happening around me. And I think it is possible to talk about these issues without insulting each other. The What I'm going to do, what I'm doing, it might look as a freestyle exercise, but actually it's just a pseudo freestyle exercise because I've been really following what's been going on, uh, not only last year, but of course already before. But what I will do is try to raise a few questions and present a few reflections with more a focus on some European countries. And my thought is influenced by the countries I know a little bit more than others, which is Belgium, which is sometimes France, which is the UK, and also a country like Italy, which will not be very present in my talk today. So I will just try to ask these four questions and offer to the discussion a few ideas. The first one is about a comparison between the older anti-racist mobilizations and movements in Europe and the more recent ones. Is it possible to compare what are the common points, what are the major differences between these two forms of mobilizations and movements? Second, is there really a kind of globalization of a new anti-racist movement? It's been a very popular theme with Black Lives Matter. Some people claim that really we are witnessing something new, a globalization of a new anti-racist movement. And for me, it remains a question mark. The third point is about a structuration of anti-racist leadership in Europe. Is there such a thing that is a new anti-racist leadership? Uh, is it in the process of structuration across the boundaries in Europe? And finally, what can we expect next? What could happen in the weeks, months, and maybe years, even though I don't have a crystal ball. When I talk about the comparison, the first point, basically, I'm trying to compare what was happening in the 70s and the 80s on the one hand, and the most recent developments from the 2010 to 2020-21. First of all, I think that we should resist the fallacious temptation of homogenization. You know, there was not one single anti-racist movement in the 70s and in the 80s, and there is not such a thing as a homogeneous anti-racism movement today, uh, even though sometimes, you know, both uh, movements have been, you know, homogenized by, for example, the press. You know, when people today talk about Black Lives Matter, they sometimes promote the idea that it would be a homogeneous group of people sharing the same analysis, the same views of strategy and tactics. And I don't think it is true, as I don't think it was true in the 70s and the 80s. I would like to point first at the difference in context, in political context. In the 70s and in the 80s, there is, of course, a rise of the far right, but in many European countries, we are still talking about an important but still marginal rise of the far right. There's no really um, uh, there's no right-wing parties in power, and so it remains a danger that Democrats perceive, but it is not an immediate threat. There's no direct perception of a challenge to the democratic institutions. Well, today we are talking more about, in several countries, of a kind of mainstreamization, not only of the right-wing parties, or some of them, but also of their ideas and their policy choices. There's a very interesting book recently published by Corcuff in France, explaining how basically the far right has won the struggle of ideas, has managed to impose its ideas in the political sphere in France. So here it's an important difference in the political context. In terms of ideologies and theories that support these movements, and here I don't want to enter the French debate about what's theory, what's ideology in French universities. I find, you know, the debates about Islamo-gauchism, as the minister has tried to legitimize that senseless expression, I find that more revealing about um, the government, that about what's going on. But still, it is true that ideas and theories are connected in different complex ways to movements and to anti-racist movements. In the 70s, especially, and also well into the 80s, there was still a very strong importance of Marxist thought in the anti-racist movements. And sometimes a class was articulated with race. And for example, in Britain, what I would call the race and class school, with people like Sivanandan and so on, were trying to basically to combine Marxist theories and ideologies with a better understanding of race and ethnicity. And today, of course, there's a trend sometimes to put on only the racial lenses, and on the other hand, there's the growth of the thinking about intersectionality, which personally I find very interesting, especially when intersectionality is more than just a word. So when we talk about intersections, we have to have dimensions to intersect. So if you say that you claim intersectionality as a perspective, and then you only look at race, basically you are not endorsing and applying an intersectional approach. So that's one thing. These theories, these perspectives were growing, but they were very marginal in the 70s and the 80s. And what I'm claiming here today is that in some parts of the anti-racist movements, capitalism and neoliberalism is taken for granted. There's no necessarily a willingness to change or to pretend that these capitalism and neoliberalism can be changed, but more to adapt to that. And I will come back to that issue a bit later when I'll talk about the claims. Well, in the 70s and the 80s, the enemy was very visible, was very identifiable. It was the far right, its militants, from the political parties to the thugs in the street. Uh, there were, fights between racist and anti-racist youth in the streets. There was, the holders of the racist disease were sort of easy identifiable. Well, today things are different. What is question is not necessarily only the far right parties and militants, but it's broadly a racist system, racist structures that sometimes, for some anti-racist militants, includes white liberals. And for some of them, the problem is even more the white liberals than the far right. This is a claim you find in some strands of the anti-racist movement today. In terms of claims, well, the claims in the 70s and the 80s were more about being recognized as co-citizens, to be included, to have access to equal rights. So it was kind of, a desire in a way to be part of the society. Today, there's more tension. There are more tensions about that. Some people actually advocate a fundamental revolution of the racist structure and the racist system. Uh, that actually was there yesterday, that is here today, and sometimes it is framed under the label of decolonization. The key actors, and actually to say one more thing about the claims, um, and again, I don't want to homogenize, but because it's debated between the activists in the anti-racist movements across Europe. But for some of the activists, the idea is to go beyond equal rights, and basically it's to increase the share of the pie in an unequal world. So the idea is to get access to resources, uh, for example, symbolic resources, economic resources. But what is important is that maybe there's a big disagreement between in the anti-racist movements between those who actually have a strong opposition towards the capitalist economic system, the neoliberal system, and people who basically just try to increase their share of the resources produced in that system. The key actors are also somewhat different. In the 70s and 80s, um, there's a strong presence of urban second generation working class migrants. So the debates about the Boer movement, actually the Boer movement was born in a cité near Lyon. And so basically the anti-racist movement was carried by second generation immigrants mainly from North Africa, who actually were post-colonial, but did not really use that post-colonial identification in the movement. In the UK, it was more also second generation from the West Indies and also from India and Pakistan. Well, today, it seems to me that there's the key actors are more to be found within post-colonial social elites. And maybe I will come back to that a bit later as well. The role played by social elite coming from um, the ex-colonies is very important in the new debates. In the case of Belgium, for example, the new movements are the main actors of the new movements are uh, people from originally from the Congo, who for most of them have never lived in the Congo. So technically they are not from Congo. They are born and educated in Belgium, but they do come more than in the 70s from, I would say, a middle and upper class background than, than before. In terms of allies and support, um, in the 70s and even before, if we would go to the States in the 50s and 60s, there is this dream to build a trans-ethnic, trans-racial coalition that is strongly supported by working class organizations. Today, this is a point of debate within the new anti-racist movements. Basically, for some activists, the movement should be black only, and for others, it should be really the old dream of forming a kind of trans-ethnic, trans-racial uh, alliance. We've seen that that tension, for example, in the big demonstration in Brussels in June last year, the 7th of June, there was in the preparation of the demonstration, all these tensions almost make it impossible to organize the demonstration. So in the movement, some were saying, we, the blacks, are the only victims of racism. We should be the only one to be represented. And others saying, this is political suicide. We should basically open up to all the people that want to fight against racism as a structure, racism as a system. So in the current debates, there are all these issues about what we can call victim competition. Who is really the victim or the ultimate victim of the racist structure and the racist system? This is a matter of contention within the movement. In terms now of repertoire of action, remember in the 70s and the 80s, of course, everybody knows by now La Marche des Beurs, with this soundtrack by music groups like a Quart de Séjour, etc. It was, you know, the big kind of, you know, it grew bigger from Toulouse when they walked to Paris. It grew bigger and bigger, but it was a kind of very interesting form of action, marching and gathering support on the way to Paris. And at the end, there was this big concert and so on. But at that time also, there is a physical opposition in the streets between activists, anti-racist activists and racist activists. For example, in the UK, where, you know, the streets basically was also the theater of a very physical struggle between the groups. Today, actually, there is something, these repertoires of action still exist, typical demonstrations and so on. We've seen that recently. But a big thing that is different is social media and internet. And so it really made a difference in the way of mobilizing, in also the content of the messages and the content of the campaigns. And so probably we need more, much more research to really understand what difference exactly do social media and internet uh, tools do for the struggle. Something also that has been observed in many countries is what I call here, to put it very simply, decolonizing campaigns, tear down the statues, mobilize to change the name of the streets and so on. And what we see in the campaign today is what I would call an extreme reactivity. So everything is used, everything is politicized. There's a very good example very recently. Well, it was last week and the week before in Belgium. There's been in Belgium a campaign about renaming streets, squares, renaming also tunnels. And actually, it was decided that one of the largest tunnels in Brussels, which was called Tunnel Léopold II. Léopold II is the king that owned Congo and that was associated and that was has been reported to be a criminal. All the things that Leopold II did in the Congo now are very well documented, and so I think it is a fair claim not to honor people like that that I share. But the tunnel in question was renamed after Annie Cordy. Annie Cordy, for those who are not from French-speaking Belgium or France, it doesn't mean anything. Annie Cordy was a popular singer born in Brussels and who made her career in France. Well, she was offered, well, she died last year, and the tunnel was renamed after Annie Cordy. And immediately there was a reaction about some people in the anti-racist movement saying, well, if you look at a song from the 70s called Chaud Cacao from Annie Cordy, you have an expression of racism, of colonialism, and so on, and therefore Annie Cordy should not get her name um, in the tunnel. There was a debate, there is a debate in the anti-racism movement about that. Some people say, yes, we have to play every ball, we have to fight back at any even small event. And other people say, well, maybe we should concentrate on heavy stuff and not maybe a singer that very few people remember and that whose influence can be discussed. These debates take part within the anti-racist movement. And also, of course, they are used by the people who do not like these movements to delegitimize any form of anti-racist struggle. Now, very briefly, I'm too long already. Is there, the mobilization is variable from one country to another? Is there globalization of a new anti-racist movement? I'm not sure. What I see, though, is that there is a trend to import Black Lives Matters analysis and frameworks of action in Europe. And that raises different issues um, that could be discussed. And well, if I take just one example, is all the debates and about the books by Robin DiAngelo and White Fragility. Um, I have serious doubts about the validity of that book and the new one that's going to appear in June in the United States. And I have even stronger resistances to talk about, to use those terms in the European context. We could probably make another debate about Robin DiAngelo, even though I don't think it's worth having a debate about that. But of course, happy if it's good for her, she's lucky to be able to make millions of dollars on those issues by educating white rich people to show them how they are genetically racist and how they will never change anyway. So, but I have serious doubts, and I'm worried about these type of imports that are characteristic of European social sciences. This is not the first time, but I do think that theories, concepts do not travel as easily as we used to travel when we could still travel. And another point, maybe that is connected to that question about the globalization of a new anti-racist movement, is the kind of commodification of the anti-racist struggle. Everybody, or almost now, is anti-racist. Nike, Adidas, the players putting the fist in the air and so on. Everybody is anti-racist. So there is a question there about what actually does it mean? Is there not a kind of uh, appropriation of the anti-racist struggle by corporation, but also by a huge part of the public opinion? And again, um, this is just an element I put on the table for discussion. And finally, and I will stop there, about the structuration of the leadership. What I find really interesting is that there is the emergence of a new leadership in different European countries, and Afro descendants, excuse me if this word is not okay for all of you, but in French speaking Belgium, it is sometimes used by actors themselves. Afro descendant women play a major role of in the struggle, which might be the result also of the intersectional um, perspective in practice, so to say. What's going on at the European level remains still very at the embryonic state. We cannot speak today of a European anti-racist leadership structure, I think. Um, what can happen in the past, and I just say that very quickly. Well, a stronger opposition in the streets. I think that in many neighborhoods, in many cities, in many countries, and this is increased also by the COVID crisis, there is really lots of tension. And the tension exploded in Liege a few days ago. Probably this will continue to happen. What we see also that there are, as it was in the case in the past, cooptation strategies by the political institution as a way of depoliticize and and de-radicalize in a way these new leaders emerging in the anti-racist movements. But I think that without a better structuration, the continuity is going to be problematic, and without alliances, marginalization is going to be inevitable. Thank you very much, and sorry for stealing a few minutes.